fact, or myth. It's mythology!
Good day, everyone. Welcome to Mythology Podcast, where we will talk about the different creation myths and cross-cultural beliefs. For today's episode, we will talk about the creation myths from the Chinese mythology, the giant Pangu. The legend of Pangu is a myth of how the heavens and earth were created according to the ancient Chinese. Every culture has an ancient legend of how the world was created. This idea is one of the most basic purposes of religion, and that is to explain how the world came to be. In much of China, the creation of the world is attributed to a being called Pangu, also anglicized as Pangu. Pangu was the first being to come to life, before either the heavens or earth had been created. While the details of the legend vary, most include him emerging from a great egg or a huge egg and using both it and his own body to create the world. The story of Pangu is one of the many creation myths in Chinese folklore. There are many versions of these myths that exist within Taoism's local and regional variations. So the story of Pangu tells how the land and sky were created, as opposed to the legends of the Jade Emperor or the Mother Goddess Nuwa that are concerned with the creation of people. Pangu's myth, like many creation myths, began with the void of chaos. Over the course of 18,000 years, the swirling chaos formed an enormous egg. Chaos still existed in this egg. However, the opposing forces of yin and yang constantly fought against one another. Eventually, yin and yang came into balance. When they did, they created Pangu. In most depictions, Pangu had an unattractive human face with rounded horns on the forehead. His arms and legs were covered in hair and he wore primitive clothing. Pangu was sometimes shown with disproportionate features suggesting dwarfism, but he soon grew to be a giant. When Pangu came into existence, he realized that he was confined in a very tight space, so he began to twist and writhe, eventually breaking the shell of the egg and emerging into the void. From there are at least 3 different versions of the story. So, Marian, can you tell us these 3 different versions of the story?
Well, Khyziah, the 3 versions are this. In the first, the cracked egg created the heavenly bodies, and in some versions of the story, the earth. The light egg whites floated up to become the clouds and stars, while the dense yolk sank down and became land. The 2 halves of the shell became the sun and moon. In other versions, however, yin and yang themselves were used to create the land and sky, while the egg made only the stars and planets. Pangu split yin and yang with his axe, so they became the 2 opposite elements in perfect balance. In both of these stories, the heavens and the earth were constantly attracted to one another. Pangu placed himself between them and pushed the sky away from the land. He held the sky in this way for 18 years. Every day, both he and the universe grew. The earth grew 10 feet thicker, while Pangu grew 3 feet taller so he could push the sky farther away. After 18 millennia, Pangu stopped growing. When this happened, he died and his limbs became the 4 pillars that hold up the sky. In the third version of the story, Pangu had a much shorter lifespan. The effort of breaking free of the egg exhausted him, so Pangu fell asleep. He died in sleep, and his body changed over time. The last of his breath became clouds. His body became the land, with his spine forming a great mountain range. His teeth and bones became metal and gems. His veins made great canyons and ravines. The blood that flowed in them becoming rivers. His sweat became rain. His voice was preserved as thunder. Even the fleas that live in his thick hair were transformed. They became the animals that inhabited the land before humans were created. His hair became forest in some retellings of the story. In others, it drifted upward and became the stars. His eyes floated away from his body. The left eye became the sun, while his right eye became the moon. In this version, his limbs also become 4 pillars that held the heavens up. His eyes floated away from his body. The left eye became the sun, while his right eye became the moon.
Let us go now on the summary of the story. Pangu, which is the central figure in Chinese Taoist legends of creation. Pangu is the first man that is said to have come forth from chaos, which is an egg with two horns, two tusks, and a hairy body. Some accounts credit him with the separation of heaven and earth, setting the sun, moon, stars, and planets in place, and dividing the four seas. He shapes the earth by forming out valleys and stacking up mountains. All this was accomplished from Pangu's knowledge of yin yang, which is the inescapable principle of duality in all things. Another legend asserts that the universe derived from Pangu's gigantic corpse. His eyes became the sun and moon, his blood formed rivers, his hair grew into trees and plants, his sweat turned to rivers, and his body became soil. The human race, moreover, evolved from parasites that infested Pangu's body. These creation myths date from 3rd to 6th century. Artistic representations frequently depict Pangu as a dwarf clothed with leaves. Now in analyzation of the story. Many versions have been told in the story of the giant Pangu. The legend of Pangu is a myth in China that was written in the 3rd century, but scholars said that it is written much older than the 3rd century. The story is all about the first man named Pangu who separated the heaven and earth. Early historians compared the mythology of China and in other ancient cultures. As they found out, the myth of this giant creature is similar to the myths of Europe, Mesopotamia, and Greek mythology. The first one is in Europe and his name is Ymir, the one who took form in a void in his creation and his body was used as the same form of Pangu. Next is in Mesopotamia where the earth was created from the body of the dragon-like goddess Tiamat. Lastly, in Greek mythology, where this task was associated with the Titans. We can really see of some scenarios in these myths that have the same story of the giant Pangu. So Chinese mythology is very diverse just like China itself and its culture. China's different views of the creation story. Some believe that there are no myths that exist and that no one can explain the world's origin. The Chinese society developed the Norse mythology, in which it illustrates the source of the universe. However, the story of Pangu has been told and most people agree and believe of what the story is all about. Because of its subject and primitive nature, it is believed that the legend is one of the oldest stories in China, where mostly people hear about this.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Rate and review this podcast and share it to your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you're living with some great things that can help you. Until next time!